Gordon is doing his PhD at Edinburgh University. He says that's because it's the only place that would have him, but I'm sure he's false modesty. He and his wife Angela are well known in the jewellery quarter in London. They had a trade business which they sold in 1996 to a FTSE 100. And then Gordon went on to create the Goldsmith magazine and British Silver Week, now in its 9th year. And Gordon is an executive member of the Goldsmiths Craft and Design Council and a freeman and more recently a liveryman of the Goldsmiths Company. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm about halfway through the PhD programme and researching the title that we've discussed, Crafting the UK Artisan Silversmith. And it's a good time at 18 months to take stock of what I've done and what I've discovered and research. And I wanted to explain this to you a little bit, that I was very much hoping, and this is the event for it to happen, and later, that there'd be an interaction between the trade and the dissertation that I'm creating. I have interviewed thus far about 40 silversmiths and round about 8 or 9 institutions. The institutions are my next big target, really, and they're the ones that are actually, in fact, quite difficult to always get interview time with, on the basis that, in actual fact, they don't know me as well as the silversmiths do, and they query for a start, why do you want this information? What are you going to do with it? Why should we tell you what we're doing? This is strategic. Things like this. So it becomes a much more difficult problem. A philosophical overview of the way I think we should be thinking as a group and as an industry about the way we go about, as an underlying philosophy of the way we should think about things. A gentleman called Bourdieu, who I don't always agree with as a philosopher, said that the sum total of a person, or the worth of a person, is their cultural capital, or their roundness, which for me is obviously no issue at all. But that was one of the things that when we look at education, that if we are creating rounded cultural people, this in itself is a worthy task. And I think that should be borne in mind. Another piece of philosophy that struck with me was by the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant, who said that to create the good and virtuous person is central to their own philosophy and to the philosophy of society, that this is something that we ought to be doing as a matter of course. And I think this is one of the underlying philosophies, in actual fact, of organisations like the Goldsmiths Craft and Design Council, the Goldsmiths Company, that they are working to the greater good. Having sort of established that as cornerstones of the way that I would like to think, I then looked at what are the motivators of people and society. And I've used the scientist Maslow, the social scientist, and he has come up with a theory which talks about self-actualization and the way that you self-actualize and move through your own lives of learning and realizing oneself. And I think this is very relevant to the underlying philosophy of how we look at our own industry and ourselves, that many people, whether they know it or not, are on a journey of actualization. A very good example is that we are, many of us are craftsmen, and our aspiration is to become an artist. And the craftsperson, when you read the literature, is not always the highest regarded of members of society, whereas the artist is considered at a higher level. And it's this aspiration that creates dissonance in people's opinion of themselves and what they're doing. And I think this is a tool that ought to be understood by the organisations that are encouraging and motivating people that if their aspiration is to be an artist, then we need to give them the path to arrive there. The Goldsmiths Company is an incredibly central organisation to what we're looking at. And I want to emphasise, I think they know it, but I want to emphasise it, that the centrality of what they're doing and the philosophy of what they're doing does affect us all. When Andrew and I went to Denmark to look at Danish silversmithing, which is probably, it's a much smaller industry than we have, they were incredibly envious of the role that the Goldsmiths Company has. And they really wanted to create something similar, but had no opportunity. They had no real chance to do it. I want to talk about where this particular dissertation might be going. And at the beginning, a third of the way, I would say, through the last 18 months, one of my, I shouldn't say this actually, one of my supervisors, and I was always told not to say this, said, "Have you considered X?" And I said, "No, it didn't cross my mind at all." And he is the head of the business school in Edinburgh, and he expanded my horizon and my imagination to what could be achieved in the dissertation. And what he outlined was, giving as an example, the round-the-world yachtswoman, Helen McCarthy, and said what this lady had done was created an accreditation system for companies that wanted to prove that they were sustainable. They had created a sustainable strategy. And she literally has created a tick box that says, okay, you say you're sustainable, now prove it. And so I was encouraged to think about a silversmiths development program and accredit it in a similar way. And I felt this is a tremendously ambitious piece of work. And I thought, to a certain extent, for several months, of should I do this? Does this sit with what I want to do? And is it overly ambitious? Yes, it is very ambitious, but I would like to try and attempt to do it. So what I'm wanting to do by the end of the 3 years is to have an accreditation system, a framework that says, if you want to be a great silversmith, or if you want to be a successful silversmith, you have to have achieved these things. And so it will document what people like Grant and Richard Fox have done to say, this is what they did to achieve where they went. And I would like to try and create those ideas to give to the organisations that are stakeholders within what all the makers do, to make sure that there's no overlaps or little overlap, and that we're all heading in the same direction, or we could be heading in the same direction. Now, the great thing is that the next speaker, Brett Payne, has promised me that he has all the answers. So all I have to do... And what you will notice, though, is that Brett starts every sentence, and he's an honorary Yorkshireman now, with, well, trouble is this... and so all I'm going to do is set the stall out, as it were, and make copious notes when Brett gets up and speaks. I'll stop fairly soon, but I would like to just do a couple more bits. In my discussions with institutions, the universities mainly, and in particular the Royal College, there is a movement away from silversmithing, and this would seem to me a certain sadness. Given the history that they have of creating truly great silversmiths, they are now thinking, and the other universities are thinking this as well, that silversmithing is too narrow a market, that we are not doing people any favours by teaching them to be silversmiths because the market is so small and declining. I have some trouble with this. The reason being that the market for them as individuals, yes, is declining. Yes, is being smaller from their own point of view. And I feel that the mistake that they are slightly making is that they as individuals have little demand for their own work. Therefore, they think that there is little demand for everyone's work. And I think that's a wrong assumption. And the concept that I would put forward is that what I've noticed in the number of years that I've been involved in silversmithing, the people who have a very strong voice are the successful people. These are the people that are working very hard, they quietly get on with it, and if they have good designs, well made, they will succeed. And what is not always understood is if it's a me too, is the phrase, product is being produced, you're not going to succeed. If you create a product which is unique or different, better, in whatever way, design or technique, you have every chance of succeeding. And I would argue that when you look at people's work, the ones who have a very strong voice are the ones who will win. Probably, is the problem. So I would argue that case. This is one of the conclusions that I would like to come towards. So where are the universities going? Where are they heading? They feel that they want to rebrand as metalwork, and they want to move away from silver. And this, to me, is a great sadness, because silver has working qualities, I'm talking to the converted here, has working qualities which other metals don't have. You can't work in copper the way you work in silver, nor brass, nor many other metals. So if you're teaching somebody to work in silver, you will be giving them a skill set that they wouldn't otherwise have, other than gold, perhaps. Gold is a joyous metal, obviously, to work in. So I think that some of the universities are coming at the problem in slightly the wrong way. And I would certainly like to challenge this. The other thing that's coming across for me is that I've noticed that a large number of people have a portfolio existence, portfolio life. They do a bit of one thing, teaching, they do a few exhibitions, they do a number of things. And I think we ought to acknowledge this. In actual fact, this is the majority of people. And the development framework that I'm looking at will say, how do we get this person from one stage to the next so that, yes, they do at the beginning, as was done by Grant, teaching, then 3 days teaching, 2 days making, 2 days teaching, 3 days making, and you move that whole thing. How do you push people along? How do you do that? And I think that organisations like the Goldsmiths Company are central to encouraging people. One of the things that influenced me hugely, I told this story when over lunch, that I went to a meeting at Sir John Cass maybe 25 years ago, and one of the things that, sorry, I'll tell the story. Grant MacDonald over there, who has a tremendously successful business, started off as a silversmith and didn't know where to sell or didn't know who to design for, and was casting around. And he phoned the Foreign Office and he said to them, do you have anybody that would deal with potential inquiries for commissions? And they said, well, it so happens that we had a fax, and here it is, and it was from Qatar. And Grant went to Qatar and found the person who had sent the fax and said, is this job still available? And he said, well, no, this one's gone, but we do have more coming up. And that somebody got on a plane, went to Qatar, spoke to the relevant people, and created a face-to-face relationship that the next time they wanted something, oh yes, there was a chap that came, they seemed a nice enough guy, blah, blah, blah. And Grant has built his whole business on when an email or a fax turns up for a design, he doesn't email it back. He gets on a plane and goes and talks to the person who wants it and will organise that sale. Nobody else does. Now, I learned a huge amount from that. When I was building my magazine business, whenever somebody phoned up and said, I'm thinking about an advertisement in your magazine, I would go and see them within 7 days, face to face, anywhere in the UK. And we built the magazine up through that. So the thing that I worked out, in actual fact, when I did my MBA 20 years ago, was the difference between the people who succeed and the people who don't is attitude. And it's the attitude to knock over every hurdle and to knock over every problem, or better still, walk round it. And it's an attitude of mind. So when we were talking earlier about filtering the people who should become silversmiths, one of the filters that I think is actually incredibly important is, can you be self-employed? Do you have the right attitude? Do you want to succeed? And having overcome those issues, you then say, right, I'll now train you to be a silversmith. Or you become a trade supplier and you score boxes for the rest of your life. And that's great. And I think this is a tremendously difficult concept to try and enforce. I'll finish on a nice joke. That it was very interesting to listen to Christina Jansen and saying that it was easy to sell dead people's silversmithing. I couldn't agree more. And I was doing an exhibition at Chelsea Town Hall a month ago, and I was bored out of my mind. I couldn't believe how bored I was. So few people coming through. We were selling almost nothing. And I put out Wally Gilbert's work as usual. And I adore Wally's work. I think he's one of the greats. I've told him that in the past. He's going bright red at the moment. And so a lady comes along and says, oh, this is fabulous. I said, yes, I know. It's fabulous work. She said, if only I could buy some of this work. I said, well, it's not that expensive. A vase might be a couple of grand or something. Sure, she wasn't short a couple of grand in Chelsea. And I said, it's really sad about Wally. So she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, it's just really sad, man being struck down in his prime. And so she goes, oh, really? Is he? I said, oh, yeah, Wednesday. So she goes, hang on a minute. And even with that sales technique, she still walked off.
Okay. Thank you very much.